Welcome to my YouTube channel at Sci-Fi Tales Pools. Please subscribe, like, and share to support my channel. Lucas Hart sat in the quiet control room of the Vanguard as the stars outside the window slowly moved by. The hum of the engines was steady and calm, but his mind was not calm. A faint signal had come through the long-range receiver only a few hours ago. It was weak and broken, but the message was clear. It was a call for help. Not from Earth, but from far away. The voice had spoken of a human colony in danger, and of a ruler who feared her people would be lost if no one came. Lucas had seen many battles in his life. He had been born on a hard world where danger waited in every forest and every ocean. He knew what it meant to fight with nothing left to lose. He also knew the cost of staying silent when others were in danger. That was why he sat alone now, looking at the signal log again and again. Many on Earth would talk for weeks before acting. They would send messages and wait for replies. But the message he had heard was not asking for talk. It was asking for action. He left the control room and walked to the crew deck. There he found Aaron Blake checking his gear. Aaron was younger, but had the same steady eyes of a man who had faced death more than once. Lucas told him about the signal and the choice they had. Aaron did not hesitate. He said they should go. That was all Lucas needed to hear. Claire Monroe was the next to know. She was in the medical bay sorting supplies. Her hands paused when Lucas spoke. She asked how bad it was. Lucas told her it was bad enough to need them. She nodded once and began packing her field kit without another word. Claire had served on worlds where the wounded outnumbered the healthy. She knew what it meant to run toward the danger instead of away from it. By the end of the hour, the core team had gathered in the strategy room. Lucas told them there would be no support from the council. This mission was not official. They would be on their own. The risk was great. But so was the reason. He saw in their faces that none of them would turn away. These were Deathworlders. People who had grown up in places where nature itself tried to kill you every day. They were trained to survive and to win, even when the odds were against them. The Vanguard was ready within a day. Supplies were loaded. Weapons were checked. Each member of the crew moved with quiet purpose. There was no speech from Lucas. There was no need for one. They all knew what they were going to do and why they were doing it. When the engines roared to full power, the stars outside became streaks of light. Faster than light travel began, and Earth was left far behind. In the mess hall, the crew spoke little. Some sharpened blades, others checked armor seals. Claire moved between them with calm focus, giving quiet words where needed. Aaron sat across from Lucas, studying the mission plan again and again, as if memorizing every detail might keep them alive. Days passed in the dark of space. Training filled the hours. They ran drills in the cargo bay, turning it into a battlefield with crates as cover. They practiced breaching doors and setting traps. They ran medical simulations under fire. Every skill they had would be tested. Lucas watched them and felt a deep respect. These were not soldiers who fought for medals. They were people who fought for others to live. When the final day of travel came, the ship was silent. Outside the windows, the stars shifted. The destination was near. Lucas stood on the bridge with Aaron and Claire beside him. They did not know what they would see when they arrived. They only knew that someone far away had called for help, and they had chosen to answer. Aaron Blake stood at the edge of the training deck with his helmet under his arm. He watched the crew finish another round of drills. Sweat covered their faces, but no one slowed down. Lucas Hart stepped in and gave a small nod of approval. They both knew the journey was almost over, and soon there would be no more practice, only the real thing. Claire Monroe moved across the deck with a case of medical gear in her hands. She set it down near the wall and began to check every item one by one. Her eyes stayed focused. She knew that every second in the field could mean life or death. She had been in battles where she had to work with nothing more than a strip of cloth and sheer will. This time she would be ready for whatever waited for them. Lucas called the crew together. They stood in a wide circle on the deck. The engines hummed under their feet. He told them they would arrive in less than a day. Told them about the message again so no one would forget why they were here. A human world was calling for help. No one else was coming. They were it. There was no turning back. Now, Aaron spoke next. His voice was steady, but his eyes were hard. He reminded them that every person on that world was counting on them. He said they would fight as one. He said they would move fast and hit hard. He said they would not stop until the job was done. The crew gave small nods. They understood. In the hours that followed, the ship became even busier. Gear was checked again and again. Weapons were cleaned until they shone. Armor was adjusted to fit tight and secure. Claire loaded extra medical packs and strapped them to her shoulders. She knew she would need them all. Lucas spent the time in the command room going over maps of the target world. He studied the layout of the cities and the terrain around them. Every detail mattered. As the final hours passed, the ship grew quiet. Some of the crew sat in their bunks with eyes closed. Others stayed awake, sharpening their blades or checking their rifles. Aaron walked the halls, making sure every person was ready. He stopped at the mess hall and found Claire sipping water. She gave him a small smile but said nothing. No words were needed. They both knew what was coming. When the signal came from the bridge, the crew moved without hesitation. Boots hit the deck in a steady rhythm. The hum of the engines changed pitch as the ship slowed. Lucas stood at the front window and saw the target world for the first time. It was large and bright against the black of space. From this distance it looked peaceful, but he knew better. He could already see faint glows on the surface. Where fires burned, the Vanguard entered orbit, and the crew prepared to descend. Aaron led the loading of the transport craft. Weapons and supplies were packed tight. Claire checked every medical kit again before loading them in. Lucas stepped into the lead craft and waited as the rest of the team joined him. The hatch closed with a solid thud. There was no sound now, except the hiss of the air systems. The transport dropped from the Vanguard and began its dive toward the surface. The view through the small windows changed from the endless black of space to the swirling colors of the atmosphere. The craft shook as it pushed through. No one spoke. Every person kept their mind on what they had to do. When the craft broke through the clouds, the world below came into full view. The land was scarred with deep black lines where battles had torn through. Buildings lay in ruins. Smoke rose in thick columns from many places. Lucas felt the weight of the moment settle on him. Somewhere down there people were waiting. Somewhere down there the fight would begin. The craft slowed as it neared the landing zone. Aaron gave hand signals to the team. Claire tightened the straps on her packs. Lucas rested his hand on his rifle. The landing gear touched the ground with a heavy thud. The hatch began to open. Light and dust rushed in. The mission had begun. The hatch of the transport opened wide and a rush of hot air filled the cabin. Lucas' heart stepped out first with his rifle raised. His boots sank slightly into the dusty ground. The sky above was a pale gray, and the air smelled of smoke and ash. Behind him, Aaron Blake led the rest of the team out in a tight formation. Claire Monroe followed close, carrying her medical packs and scanning the area for wounded. They had landed on the edge of a broken street. Cracked stone and shattered metal lay everywhere. In the distance, faint cries could be heard. Lucas signaled for the team to move forward. They advanced slowly between ruined buildings. Every shadow was watched. Every corner was checked. The ground was littered with signs of a recent battle. As they moved deeper into the city, the team saw the first group of survivors. A small number of men, women, and children huddled together near the remains of a wall. Their clothes were torn and their faces pale with fear. Claire went to them at once, kneeling to check the wounded. She spoke in a calm voice, telling them they were safe now. Lucas and Aaron stayed alert, keeping their eyes on the streets ahead. One of the older men among the survivors pointed toward the center of the city. Lucas understood without words. That was where the real fight was happening. He gave a quick nod to Aaron, and they began moving again. Claire stayed with the survivors long enough to treat a young boy with a deep cut on his arm. Then she rejoined the team. The sounds of battle grew louder as they approached the city center. Sharp cracks of gunfire echoed between the buildings. The streets became narrower and the damage greater. Burned vehicles blocked the way in some places, forcing the team to take side paths. The heat from nearby fires pressed against their skin. Sweat ran down their faces, but no one slowed at last. They reached a wide square that opened before a large stone hall. This place had once been beautiful, but now its walls were scarred and its windows shattered. Dozens of defenders were gathered there, holding a fragile line against advancing attackers. Lucas saw that they were outnumbered and running low on strength. Without hesitation, he raised his rifle and fired. Aaron and the rest of the team joined him, pouring fire into the enemy ranks. The sudden arrival of the Deathworlders shocked the attackers. They faltered under the fierce assault. Aaron shouted for the defenders to push forward. Together they drove the enemy back step by step. The sound of battle filled the square. Claire moved swiftly among the fallen, dragging the injured to cover and treating wounds. Even as bullets struck near her feet, the fight lasted many long minutes. At last, the enemy broke and fled into the side streets. Cheer rose from the defenders, though it was weak and tired. Lucas ordered his team to hold the square and watch for a counterattack. The defenders looked at the newcomers with a mix of gratitude and disbelief. Few had expected help to come from across the stars, and fewer still had expected it to arrive with such force. Inside the stone hall, the air was cooler, but heavy with tension. Lucas was led to the ruler of this world, a tall woman in armor marked by many battles. Her eyes studied him closely. She asked no questions about who they were or why they had come. Instead, she spoke of the danger that still surrounded the city and the people still trapped beyond the walls. Lucas listened in silence and then gave his answer. They would not leave until the danger was gone. Aaron began organizing the defenders, while Claire set up a medical post inside the hall. The wounded were carried in and laid out in rows. The air was filled with the sounds of pain, but also with hope. For the first time in many days, the people felt they might survive. Night fell over the city, but the work did not stop. Patrols guarded the square. Medics tended to the injured. Fires were put out where they could be reached. Lucas stood on the steps of the hall looking over the battered streets. He knew this was only the beginning. The hardest battles were still ahead, and he intended to win every one of them. The sun rose over the broken city, casting long shadows across the square. Lucas' heart was already awake, standing on the steps of the stone hall with his rifle at his side. Around him, the defenders were preparing for another day of fighting. The air was still, but the silence was heavy. Everyone knew the enemy would return, and they would come in greater numbers than before. Aaron Blake walked up to Lucas with a map in his hands. He pointed toward the outer streets where the enemy had retreated the night before. He said they would likely try to break through from two sides at once. Lucas nodded and told Aaron to split their forces to cover both approaches. Every person who could hold a weapon was sent to the barricades. Claire Monroe was already at the medical post, checking her supplies and giving instructions to the helpers she had gathered from the local people. The morning passed in tense waiting. Scouts moved along the rooftops, watching for signs of movement. The smell of smoke still lingered in the air from the fires that had burned through the night. The wounded inside the hall rested under Claire's care, their quiet groans mixing with the muffled sounds from outside. Lucas walked among the defenders, speaking to them in low, steady tones. He reminded them they were not alone, and that they had already proven they could stand against the enemy. By midday, the sound of distant gunfire reached the square. It grew louder with each passing moment, until the streets ahead came alive with the noise of battle. The enemy charged from the north and the west at the same time. Aaron was at the north barricade shouting orders as his team fired in controlled bursts. The defenders held their ground despite the pressure. At the west side, Lucas led the fight himself, moving between cover and firing with precision. The enemy tried to break through, but each attempt was met with fierce resistance. Claire heard the battle grow closer to the hall and prepared for the wounded who would be brought in. The first came within minutes, a young defender with a burn across his arm. She treated him quickly and sent him back to the line. More came after him, some carried by their comrades, and some crawling on their own. Her hands worked without pause, cleaning wounds, binding them, and giving water to those too weak to stand. The fight raged through the afternoon. Aaron's side pushed forward at one point, driving the enemy back down the street. Lucas called for a counterattack on his side as well, forcing the attackers into retreat. The sound of gunfire slowly began to fade, as the enemy fell back once more. By late afternoon, the streets were quiet again, though the smell of battle hung heavy in the air. The defenders began to regroup in the square. Many were exhausted, their faces lined with dirt and sweat. But there was relief in their eyes. They had held the city again. Lucas walked among them, checking for any sign of another attack. Aaron reported that the outer streets were clear for now. Claire emerged from the hall with a tired expression, but a small smile. She had saved many lives today, though some had been lost despite her best efforts. As the evening settled over the city, Lucas called a meeting inside the hall. The ruler of the world stood at the head of the table with Aaron, Claire, and several local leaders. They spoke of the battles fought and the danger that still remained beyond the city. The enemy was not gone. They had only pulled back to prepare for the next strike. Lucas listened to every word, then made his plan. They would not wait for the enemy to come again. Instead, they would take the fight to them. At dawn, Aaron began assigning positions for the coming mission. Claire prepared extra medical packs, knowing she would need them in the field. The local defenders volunteered to join the attack. Even though still wounded from the last fight, the spirit of the people had changed. They were no longer only holding on to survive. Now they wanted to win. Outside the hall, the night deepened. Fires burned in barrels to give light. Patrols walked the streets, watching for signs of movement. Lucas stood once more on the steps of the hall, looking into the darkness. Tomorrow would decide the fate of this world. He knew the battle would be hard, but he also knew they had the will to finish it. That was enough for him to believe they could succeed. The first light of dawn touched the edges of the broken city. Lucas Hart stood with his team near the gates, ready to move. The air was cool but heavy with the smell of smoke and dust. Around him, the defenders prepared for the march ahead. Weapons were loaded. Armor straps were tightened. Faces showed no fear, only steady resolve. Today, they would not wait for the enemy. Today, they would take the fight to them. Aaron Blake stood at Lucas's side, going over the final plan. The attack would be swift and direct. They would strike the enemy camp before the sun rose high. Claire Monroe was close by, checking the packs of supplies she had prepared through the night. Every bandage, every vial, and every tool was ready. She knew that soon she would need them all. The gates opened, and the group moved out in silence.
Alice.
Their boots crunched against the dirt road. The streets were empty now. Only the ruins stood as silent witnesses to what had passed. The city fell away behind them, and the open land stretched ahead. The rising sun lit the path with a pale gold glow. They moved quickly, knowing the element of surprise was their greatest weapon. After an hour of steady marching, the scouts ahead signaled that they had found the edge of the enemy camp. From a low ridge, Lucas looked down and saw rows of makeshift shelters and equipment. Fires burned in pits, and guards walked slowly between the tents. It was clear the enemy had not expected an attack this early. Lucas turned to Aaron and gave a single nod. The time had come. The team split into two groups. Aaron led his group to the left to circle around and cut off any escape. Lucas led the rest straight down the ridge. They moved fast and silent until the first guard spotted them. By then, it was too late. The Deathworlders were already in the camp. Shouts rose but were quickly drowned out by the sound of gunfire and the clash of steel. The defenders from the city joined in with fierce energy. They had waited for this moment, and they fought with everything they had. Claire stayed close to the rear lines, moving from fighter to fighter as they fell wounded. Her hands worked quickly, stopping bleeding and lifting the injured to safety. She never paused for long before moving to the next. Around her, the battle raged. Lucas fought at the front, driving deep into the camp. Aaron's group struck from the side, trapping the enemy between them. Confusion spread through the enemy ranks, and their defense began to break. The fight was hard, and many moments came when the outcome was uncertain. Yet slowly the balance shifted. The enemy could not match the determination of those who fought for their homes. The camp began to fall apart. Shelters were abandoned. Weapons were thrown aside. Some tried to flee but were met by Aaron's line and forced to surrender. Others fought until they could fight no more. By midday, the battle was over. The camp was silent except for the sounds of the wounded being cared for.
Lucas
stood in the center with his rifle lowered. Around him, his team and the defenders gathered their strength. The victory was complete. The threat that had hung over the city was gone. The people were free again. They marched back to the city, carrying the news of their victory. As they entered the gates, the crowd that had gathered began to cheer. The sound rose like a wave, filling the broken streets with life again. The ruler of the city stepped forward to meet them, her armor shining in the sunlight. She spoke words of thanks to Lucas, Aaron, Claire, and every person who had stood with them. She vowed that the bond between her world and the Deathworlders would never be broken that night. The city was alive with celebration. Fires burned bright in the square. Music rose into the air. Food was shared freely among all. Claire tended to the last of the wounded before joining the others. Aaron laughed with the defenders, sharing stories of the battle. Lucas stood quietly watching the joy around him. He knew that they would leave soon, but he also knew they had done what they came to do. They had answered a call for help when no one else would. And in doing so, they had changed the fate of an entire world. Thank you for watching and being part of our community.